Okay, so this is now being recorded. So hello everybody, my name is Dr. Elise Rosser and I am a non-Indigenous academic in the School of Indigenous Australian Studies at Charles Sturt University, and I will be chairing today's session. Before we begin, however, I would like to acknowledge that I'm Zooming to you today from Wiradjuri country and also acknowledge the sovereignty of Wiradjuri and all First Nations Australians. I also pay respect to elders of all First Nations, past, present and always, and honour them for maintaining the cultural and intellectual foundations that ensure these traditions continue in perpetuity. So this afternoon's session is on the theme of Indigenous Perspectives on Public Library Services. And I'm very happy to announce that we have three excellent presenters today. Pippa Herden, who will be presenting on First Nations collections. Jasmin Ratana, who will be presenting on activating Indigenous perspective to transform the library experience. And Paige Johnson, who will be presenting on co-designing with community, tea, yarns, and rule breaking. So the way that this panel is going to be set up, it's more of a panel discussion than perhaps some of the other conferences if you've attended other panels in this conference. Each presenter will speak one after the other, and then at the end of those three presentations, we're going to have a general Q&A discussion, sort of like an open, I guess, forum, if you will. So as you're watching, if you have questions, just pop them in the chat and they will be collated, and then we will address those questions once all three presenters have spoken at the end of the session. So first up, we have Pippa Herden, and I am just attempting to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, I think we're on.
Exactly that.
Yep, excellent. Okay, take Pippa.
Amazing. Thank you, Elise. Yum, everyone. I'm just going to jump right into it. My theme is a bit more broader than collections, but I do touch on that in a little bit. But of course, I just like to say yama. This is how we say hello where my family are from. And thank you for inviting me to speak on this theme, Indigenous Perspectives in Public Libraries. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I've got my little earpods in, so just give me a shout if anything changes.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Hopefully not too loud if I'm yelling at you. My name's Pippa Herden. I'm a Gumrow woman with other ancestral connections to places like Ireland, Germany, Scotland and England. I grew up in Tamworth, which is northwest New South Wales, before moving down here to Gadigal country about 10 years ago, where I finished a Bachelor of Arts majoring in History and English. And I'm so close, a few weeks away from handing in a project to finish off a Master of Museum and Heritage Studies here at Sydney Uni. As of October last year, I'm the First Nations Collections Curator in the Rare Books and Special Collections Department here at University of Sydney Library. I'll jump to the next slide. Thanks. Amazing. Hopefully it'll come up soon. Perfect. Of course, I'd like to start off by acknowledging country. I'm joining in from the lands of the Gadigal people, the beautiful country, as I mentioned, I've lived, worked and studied on for the past 10 years. And I'd also like to acknowledge the lands and waters where you are on and the places you call home. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, who have handed down custodianship to each generation for more than 60,000 years. First Nations people are the original storytellers, history makers, and this care for country, culture, and community is something I think we should all be inspired by as we work on First Nations lands in libraries. This beautiful placemaking piece is by the Gamilaroi and Mulberry artist Jessie Waratah. It's called Walking on Country. And I worked on this project over the last couple of years, 2023 and 24. And it emerged from engagement work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and the community across the university. So I'll speak on that in a little bit. It was a project called the Digital Presence Project. Jessie has created this cartographical interpretation of the beautiful Sydney Gadigal country with amazing, gorgeous plants and flora that you could find around our region. And the idea that this placemaking piece was really to connect the library and our digital and physical spaces with country, and invites us to remember that we are always on Aboriginal land. And it appears both in our physical and digital spaces. So if you're ever in Fisher Library, come and check it out. I'll go next slide. Thanks, Elise. So before I jump right in, I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm hoping to talk about today. I'll begin with a bit of an introduction of how I approach this theme for the panel before highlighting some projects that I've worked across in the 3 jobs over the past 5 years in libraries. My entry into the library world was as a children's library assistant at Waverley Library in Bondi Junction. I think I saw a familiar name in the Zoom. Before jumping over to the University of Sydney to work in 2 inaugural roles, the Indigenous Engagement Officer and, as I mentioned, the First Nations Collections Curator. And I'll end with some overall reflections on the industry and some of the challenges that we're continuing to face when it comes to ensuring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people receive respect, reciprocity, transparency, empathy, and empowerment in libraries. Next slide, please. So the theme for the talk, as Elise mentioned, is Indigenous perspectives in public libraries. Initially, as I currently work in an academic library, I was a bit uncertain of my contribution to the conversation. However, on reflection and my experience working in a public library, when understanding First Nations perspectives, the divide between public and academic libraries is somewhat non-existent. I've titled this presentation Beyond Tradition, reflecting on 5 years working in libraries. And the aim is for it not to be a resume pitch, but to provide a snapshot on highlights and difficulties that I've faced as being an Indigenous person in the library sector who has worked with some amazing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across these places. Next slide, please, Elise. So I'll jump into my first role, which feels like forever ago. But as I mentioned, I started as a children's library assistant. And this role was really about delivering story time and different activities to a range of children from basically 0 right through to the end of high school. So this could look like arts and craft, it could look like poetry sessions, building the collection as well. And I think even though this wasn't an identified role, I really wanted to ensure that I was bringing in my own culture and bringing in cultural perspectives and storytelling within the role. So I've highlighted a couple of different projects that I worked on across that time. So one of them was a Reconciliation Week display, and this is something that we see in a lot of our public libraries, and it's something I think we've all probably had a hand in at some point. And I think I really wanted to make sure that there was a lot of visibility when it comes to Indigenous stories, and I think there's so many amazing kids' stories as well to share. I'm not sure if people are aware, Bondi Junction is a really lovely, diverse community from people from all across the world. So I really wanted to make sure that people are learning about First Nations knowledges and storytellings through our library. And the best place to start is in the kids' library. Another approach was throughout COVID. So I worked kids programming in COVID, which was a bit tricky, but we did a lot of online resources. As you can see, I did a little brochure, up around NAIDOC Week in 2021, and really leaning on our digital resources, things like Libby, BorrowBox, and how to connect that with the theme of NAIDOC Week that year. And my proudest, I guess, project was actually linked up to my Gamilaraay language course I was doing at the time, which was this, as you can see on the right-hand side. So the idea, it was a memory game that I would teach the kids. So I would teach them the language for the Aboriginal or the native animal, Indigenous animal. I'd put the garar or the grass on top. I'd describe the animal, and the kids hopefully would remember and have to link up the word with the animal itself. And this was a really great way for me to connect with culture and also give back to community down here. And I've popped down that this particular project, I did reach out to the Gujaga Foundation, who are a Daryl community organisation here, just to get approval from them that I was able to speak language on their country. So I think a big reflection piece from this role is that particularly in libraries, public libraries, in the kids' library, it's often individual action and initiative that really drives weaving in these Indigenous knowledges and storytellings. And hopefully that it's changed a little bit, that it's become a part of the fabric of the library to incorporate this. And I think a big part as well was incorporating and making sure we have a lot more community connection with external organisations like the Gujaga Foundation. And I had them come in to deliver a Daryl language course for the community. So hopefully those types of connections, we can really create these public libraries a space of community and I guess, uplifting Aboriginal knowledges and stories. And one little thing before we jump to my next role, I think a big reflection point for me in this job was that there is quite a lot of cultural load within library staff, or sorry, Indigenous staff in public libraries. And I think this is potentially just because of cultural competency at the time was a little bit less within the library. So things, people pulling you aside and asking you questions like, oh, I heard on the radio the other day about an opinion on this Indigenous issue. What do you think? And I was in the meantime making a Play-Doh sculpture. So it was just the little experiences like that that I think could be uplifted in terms of cultural competency. But all in all, it was an amazing introduction into the library world and something I'm really grateful for. Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. I feel like I'm zooming through, so I probably need to take a breath. We'll jump into, this was my first role here at the University of Sydney Library. So it was the Indigenous Engagement Officer, and this, no one had done the job before. So it was really about understanding how to bring in more cultural competency into the library. What does First Nations engagement look like, not only with our students, but also with other Aboriginal staff and also with our non-Indigenous colleagues in the library. And a big project that I led early on in my role was the First Nations Digital Presence Project. As you can see here, it was all about understanding what does cultural wellbeing look like on a digital platform. So we think about this, and I know libraries are talking about this quite a lot for the last 10 years in our physical spaces, but what does this look like when we're thinking about our community accessing our digital platforms? And for us here at Sydney Uni, our library is accessed by every student multiple times throughout their whole degree, multiple times for our staff. So we really wanted to ensure we're hearing from First Nations people to get their perspectives on cultural safety in a digital sense. So we went out and we had feedback from about 41 staff, students and allies across the university, which for me was an amazing number because, you know, sometimes engagement work is hard to build those connections when you're so fresh. And I've pulled out some images. This is what our website looks like now. So a really big part, the main key feedback point we got was the importance of a visible acknowledgement of country that is respectful and that it can't be clicked away as easily. And people talked a lot about acknowledgements that are sort of hidden at the bottom of pages, and they're not a visible recognition that we really respect Indigenous knowledges. This one here, it's not up all the time, but as you can see up in the red bar above the catalogue search bar, you'll always see this always was, always will be on Aboriginal land, or Aboriginal sand, sorry. So that's always there. And another important place feedback that we had was the importance of having artwork, cultural markers, cultural signifiers right throughout our website. And that's something we're always working on. So we have a page called the First Nations Hub that just gives a bit of a general overview of what we've been up to in the library when it comes to First Nations engagement. And this also features Jessie Waratah's artwork I showed before. And other couple of themes that come back to us was the importance of knowing the mob in the library, who's there, who can they talk to. And I think that's just an added layer of people feeling comfortable and really feeling safe to come in and use the library when they know that there's other Aboriginal people here that might be able to understand them a little bit better. We are working in the oldest academic library in the country. And so with that, there are a lot of barriers that a lot of students are facing in terms of quite an overwhelming place, very old place. So I think students knowing that there's mob in the library is super helpful. And lastly, another thing that I think we're working on here in the library is how do we make sure that people see the library as a place for truth telling, not only in the digital, so highlighting certain collections that touch on truth telling, holding events. You know, we've had the uncles from Kinchilla Boys Home come in to do a truth telling session. And how can this place, an institution for knowledge, really be driving those conversations here at the university? So yes, that was a couple of themes that popped up. It was a very important project that we worked on. So yeah, we'll jump to the next. So this one, still in the engagement officer role, but this is sort of our cultural learning for library staff. So I created a cultural experiences program over 2023 and 2024. And the purpose really was to embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural knowledges and practices within the staff calendar. So this was about the library staff being able to come in and learn beyond our library practice, learn beyond our systems and software, and really understand Aboriginal cultural expression to then be able to bring this back into our work and be able to support Indigenous knowledges, whether it's through collections, our systems, our software, how we work with our students and our colleagues across the university. And I guess the long-term goal is that it starts to really shape the library's culture and addresses our historical silences as a colonial institution through things, as I mentioned, like truth-telling and celebrating culture, art, and certain other expressions. The different types of activities we had, you can see a couple. We did an artist workshop, we've done walking tours on the ecological history in Glebe, social political history in Redfern. We went out to Bondi to check out the gorgeous rock carvings up on the North Head. We've had weaving workshops, bush plants, tea making. There's so many amazing cultural facilitators that we'll be able to build that connection with. And we now have those amazing contacts in the library. So yes, and we had amazing feedback actually from the staff. And of course, a day you can go try some Indigenous tea is always lovely. And I just want to give a shout out to Paige, actually, who you'll hear from soon. Paige is in the Indigenous Engagement Officer role now. And I think Paige is really instrumental in a lot of these projects along the way and a massive support. So we partnered a lot with these projects. So yeah, couldn't have done it without her, but you'll hear her side of it soon. I'll jump to the next slide, thanks. So now we're in present terms. My current role, as I mentioned, I'm the First Nations Collections Curator. So I take care of all of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges specific to rare books and special collections, but I do tend to branch out across into our general collection across all of our library spaces. I'm quite fresh into this role, so I started in October last year. So I've really tried to get my head around, again, it's a role that no one's done before. So what does it look like to bring in a First Nations perspective into our legacy collections, into our older material, but also how do we bring in fresh information and fresh knowledges? I think the first thing I did was really to look at building a community, I guess, amongst Aboriginal and other mob who work in the sector. So I went out and spoke to some amazing people who work at places like the State Library, the NLA. Oh gosh, I think we spoke to heaps of people and really tried to understand. Yeah, really tried to understand what they've been doing in their practice to then be able to, I guess, borrow and be inspired by for me to bring back here. And I think a big thing I took away is that this work, unlike a lot of library practice where we want procedures and a sort of umbrella effect, I think really with Indigenous knowledges and really understanding how to unravel colonial practices, it is unique and it's case by case, if not it's book by book, which is slow moving, and there's only one of me in this space. So I think it's a bit tricky to balance deadlines and wanting things to move, but then also wanting to have respect for these materials and taking our time with it. These are some of our collection items. So we have, of course, books, but also some magazines. Some people might be familiar with the Dawn magazines. The map is an early version of the Tyndale maps. And then as you can see on the right-hand side, the final edition. But move to the next slide. Thanks, Elise. Perfect. So I guess in terms of where I'm at now in this role, my focus at the moment, so this image is from a collection by APLC, who was an anthropologist here at the university from about the 30s through to the 70s. So apart from his anthropological practice, he was very much entrenched in his faith and had a lot to, he was almost going to become a priest before he moved on to anthropology. So a lot of his work is driven by his faith. And he also was a real leading figure It's hard to talk about him because he is quite controversial. He did really lead a lot of the thinking around assimilation policies and welfare policies, in particularly New South Wales, but it did ripple across the whole country. So he was on the board for the Aborigines Welfare Board, the protection boards. So he had a lot to say when it comes to a lot of treatment against Aboriginal people that, of course, as we know now, is the stolen generation. So I think my approach to this collection is still developing, but things as I've put here, like unraveling metadata, how do we then go back and put in Aboriginal knowledges, mark languages, talk about the communities that are being spoken about. And I know Tui Raven wrote an amazing piece on reparative collections descriptions and where can we use IATA's subject headings where it's possible and appropriate. So I think other parts of my role, where's possible, I do work with the curators on weaving Indigenous knowledges throughout our collections. So we have an exhibition on Ida Uthwaite, who is an illustrator on fairies, which might not sound, I guess fitting for what's Indigenous knowledges and how do we draw that out. So I think come check it out. And another one, we're looking at an exhibition on early colonial Sydney and health and medicine. So looking at early Gadigal, Darug concepts of health and medicine and the impact of colonization. Another big focus, I think, hopefully you're understanding in these legacy collections a lot of heavy colonial content and perspectives. So you have to skew through and read through the gaps, read through the lines really on where the Indigenous knowledges are. And I think that's amazing resources and we can use these for teaching and for our exhibitions, but how can we balance that? So a real focus for me is acquiring Indigenous authored and created material. So we have themes and topics like sci-fi, comics, artist books, Indigenous queer representation, poetry, literature. So it's a very vast and very broad collection we have. And I think lastly, my future goal really for my role in here, in this position, is to look at a goal of reciprocity and reaching out to the communities for collaboration and getting their perspectives and understandings to then build up our collection, but also be able to give back reconnect them with their knowledges. I'm not quite there yet, but it is a future goal. I'll jump to the next slide. Thanks, Elise. So I'll zoom through these because I think I'm shimming over the time, but I think these are just some overall really reflections that have come up, particularly in my last 5 years in libraries, namely mostly in this current role in collections. I think I've mentioned that First Nations approaches are sometimes at odds with the archival library or museum practice, particularly when it comes to reparative collections descriptions, our metadata, and how can we make sure that they're culturally appropriate and what are the restrictions of those systems. Another really big one that's jumped out to me is the importance of educating mob and communities on how to access archives and really relieving some of their, I guess, anxieties around how do I use a catalogue? Where's the building? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? I think I'm very lucky to have been able to navigate this through my work in my university. But for a community that are wanting to come in and they don't know, I think we really need to step up and help them out a lot more. And to end on, I think another thing that we've probably all know working in this space is that it does take a bit of a mental toll for Indigenous people working in the glam sector. And this is particularly in collection spaces. So when you are reading quite heavy colonial material and trying to navigate your own family experience as well. So I think this is just certain points that institutions could help us out a lot more on to be able to really sort of promote Indigenous employment, but also our own histories and family stories within our work. But yeah, last little slide. And so yeah, I'd just like to say Maraba, which is how we say thank you in Gamilarey. And I'm very looking forward to everybody's questions. And I really just want to continue this work and continue empowering other mob in our libraries. So thank you.
You for that, Pippa. That was wonderful. And I'd just like to say that you absolutely have some great insights and don't worry about the contributions because they're absolutely there for this conference. That's fascinating stuff. I'm going to have to follow up with you later.
Thank
So
you.
Next up, we have Jasmin Ratana, who is presenting on activating Indigenous perspectives to transform the library experience. So I'm just quickly loading up your slides. The tech will cooperate. Is that working now?
So I'm trying to get the full screen. Yep.
Excellent. All right. Take it away, Jasmin.
Kia ora. Ai ki te nuku, ai ki te rangi, ko te kaua ora, ko te kaua ora, te hei mauri ora. He moka tēnei o te taura wiri o hene ngā kau, ko ruape te maunga, ko Whanganui te awa, ko Whanganui te iwi, ko au te awa ko au. Kia ora, everyone. I am the strand of the plaited rope of my ancestors, hene ngā kau. Ruape is my ancestral mountain. Whanganui is my ancestral river. Whanganui are my people. I am the river, and the river is me. And so that's just a little bit of an introduction into who I am. And I want to share a little bit of the journey that we have had here at our library, the Whanganui Public Library, with the integration of mātauranga Māori in our library service, and particularly the library that I work in, which is the Alexander Library, Te Rerenga Mai o Te Kauri, which is a heritage and research library. So just to add a little bit of perspective, I know some people call it the indigenisation of the library space. I like to see it as a little bit of a colonisation, I suppose, of our attitudes as Māori people, and particularly for us, our attitudes as Whanganui, because we are Whanganui people. So we like to pour a little bit of that into our library. And so, yeah, so I'm going to share a little bit about that. So just for comparison, this slide that we have here is just a little bit of a look at the traditional libraries of Māori people. So couched in the environment, so in the stars, in the air, on the wing of that bird or the brow of that hill, the bend of that river, that's where all our stories and information are. The catalogues, that carved house, that old man over there, your kuia. So that is where we kept and how we managed our information in past times. Nowadays, of course, the catalogues are rarer and rarer to access the information, and fewer indexes are created, being our old people, our tupuna, who would share that knowledge from one generation to the next. And because we were an oral society, so we didn't have a lot of written information, it was all passed down orally. So as these people have passed away, it's been very difficult to access the old library. And all our information, I guess, has been, I suppose, buried underneath the new colonised way of looking at libraries, which is, it's a little bit different than ours. So I made you this slide as a bit of a mood board. I just discovered about mood boards. So that's just to get you in the mood a little bit. So as I said, I work at the Alexander Library, Te Rerenga Mai o Te Kauri. We are the Heritage and Research Library for the Whanganui District. Estimated population, 48,900. That's the Whanganui District, that is not the library. So that's at last census, now possibly around 50,000, maybe more. So our library is in a beautiful Art Deco heritage building. The facade of our library is a little bit of it's got a bit of a Grecian vibe, I suppose. There's a couple of pillars out there. The inside of our library is reminiscent of your stately home. We have beautiful old wooden tables, classic wood shelving, gilt portraits. Oh, can we show the other slide, the next slide, Elise, please? and then you'll get an idea. So there it is. That's what it looks like. It's your traditional old library. Yes, before you ask, we do have some Indigenous art gracing the walls. I know I've only showed you these sort of more colonised looking things, but the Indigenous art still gives it a bit more of a stately home vibe, because as we know, the lords and ladies were great collectors of the Indigenous art. So that's the library where I came to work some time ago. Because it's a heritage building, there's not much we can do about that. So I'm here to tell you that looks aren't everything. And I guess we began our journey really with more of a feeling. It was a feeling, a bit of an uncomfortable feeling, really. And it wasn't all caused by the vibe of the building or the staff of the time. It was more caused by how our Māori heritage items sat, our collection items sat within that space. It was a very Europeanized space, and they were sort of within Europeanized processes, I suppose. And they didn't interact well, I felt, with our traditional library methods, processes, methods of storage, indexing, all of that. Okay, so that may sound a bit wee-woo to some people, wee-woo. But if you're an Indigenous librarian or an Indigenous library user, you probably get what I'm saying. I sat awkwardly amongst it all. I felt the discomfort. I felt the oppression. I felt the helplessness of not knowing what to do about it. And so I was like the strange fish, really, trying my best to conform to, the normal librarian's way of doing things. So I did have a talk to my manager at the time, and, sort of explained to her how I felt about the whole thing. And so the idea was formed at first, not to change the look of our library space, but to change the feel, because it was the feeling that was the problem for me, I guess. And so my manager at the time suggested creating a Māori values framework in order to have that base of Māori culture in the library space. So I don't know what everyone thinks or knows about these frameworks, but they're quite common here in New Zealand. I don't know if we have them in Australia, but the idea is that they instill Māori cultural values into the workplace for us to use as a guide, a reference point, so that we can be more considerate of our fellow Indigenous colleagues. And, if they're very helpful in many, many ways. Can I have the next slide, please, Elise? How's my time going, Sandy? So our resulting framework was not quite like that. So we needed a framework that was not only considered our colleagues and our library users, but also our collection. And so for Māori people in particular, all things have a Māori or a life force. So books, taonga, everything that's in the library is no exception. So it's not just people, it's every item that's in there. So where most frameworks are a how-to, so how to behave, how to act, ours is more of a what and a why framework, I guess. So it's more like this is what it is and this is why we're doing it. And then we formed the how from there, essentially. So we named it Te Kauru, the Te Kauru Access Framework. So Te Kauru for Whanganui people is the word for the solar plexus. So, and to our people, it's there from the gut where all the emotions and things are formed. So they're not, a lot of people say from your heart, but for our people, it's coming from that center of you, that center point, Te Kauru. So that's where all of the emotion and the passion rises that, that is poured into all of these taonga, the books, everything like that. So we called it Te Kauru, the Te Kauru Access Framework. We made sure to call it an access framework because It was about creating equity of access in the end for Māori people in the space. So there are five po there, if you can see them on the slide, that represent the framework. So you could say these 5 po would be the 5 corner posts of Māori culture generally. So we've formed the framework in partnership with iwi, our local iwi, because, you know, it's almost impossible to be doing these type of things without their support. So just to explain, I know, you know, I'll just take a little time to explain all of these type of things, but just in general, because we don't have, you know, a couple of days to wānanga about these things, kawa, we just call the immovable protocols. So to Whanganui people, kawa is the things that are handed down from the heavens. So they are the immovable things that are always going to be. And we've defined those as respect, acceptance, and acknowledgement. So that's what we apply to everyone and everything in the library. And sometimes it's hard, like as Pippa was talking before about some of the books and information that is a little bit confronting for Indigenous people. So, but as long as we know that we accept the author and what they've written, we acknowledge their hard work, and that's it. We don't have to agree with it, but we just give it respect, acceptance, and acknowledgement. So cover is really, really important in the whole framework. It's probably the base of it, really. And then the other thing, so mana, it's interpreted here as prestige, authority, but it's a much, much deeper thing to us. And it's something indefinable that everybody has that is really important. And tikanga is just about doing things in the correct way. So it's more about your processes and getting those correct. Mauri is life force, we call it life force. So that is around how we use and store and care for all our taonga in the library. And remembering not just the taonga, but also each other. So it's all about that caring for the life force going on in the library. And tapu, the protection and restriction part of it. So there are some things that for whatever reason, people need support when they're using. So it's not to restrict people from using things so much as to offer them support while using. I know it's hard to make it not look like a gatekeeper, but that's not the intent. That's really not the intent there. So those 5 po, once we stood those 5 po up in the library, not literally, of course, figuratively speaking, it enabled us to integrate Māori culture at literally every level of the library. So the 5 po, most importantly, they're interpreted in our Whanganui ways, or our iwi way. We call it Whanganui because it's the Whanganui way of doing things. So that's really, really important to me personally and to us as a library because we're in the Whanganui region. So these po, they live and breathe our tupuna and our ancestors. So they, to Māori coming into the library, and that's pretty much every Māori, it feels familiar, they feel comfortable, they allow you to feel at home in a previously alien space, and gives people permission to be themselves. You know, when I first started working here, people used to tiptoe into the library because they've got these beautiful polished floors, and, you know, and they just make a noise when you walk in, and people would tiptoe, they'd look around, and then they'd turn around, and if I wasn't fast enough, they'd be out the door. So this has been really, really important to me that that doesn't happen anymore. So just to be clear, there's nothing actually visible going on here. So it's all about the feel of the library. So everything appears exactly as it did in that original mood board. It's all still the same, but it's about how the feeling has changed, the culture has changed in the library. And that was the whole purpose behind what we're doing. So it's all like dealing with the feeling, essentially. So the infiltration of Māori culture gives you reasons why you should alter your method of indexing. It suddenly becomes obvious to you why you need to change your collection arrangement, which we did, and that's okay. And as Pippa did talk about those annoying tokenistic ceremonies that people expect you to perform because you're a Māori person, all of a sudden they were meaningful. They had a reason. They were dictated to by the framework. So the framework says, this is what we should be doing. And so it's fine. That's okay. And you can do it without feeling weird. We used to call it renta Māori. That's what we used to call it. So just to get rid of that, which is really horrible, horrible feeling, that really, really helps with that. How did we get it over the line? Well, and get it accepted? Yep, there's lots of challenges, and there were challenges to this type of cultural shift. We had a really great manager at the time who was really open to a bit of change. So she really, really supported this, and we're really lucky in that respect. When you do anything in the library space, it's, you need to remember that it's not all about you. So, because it's a public library, so the public library is for everybody. And yeah, so we needed to be very aware that while we were standing up Māori culture in the library, we weren't sort of, subsuming anybody else or overtaking the mana of other peoples that use the library. So the great thing about the framework is that it is very interactive with other cultural norms and values and needs. So it's really great like that. And, European culture is so ascendant in New Zealand society that we really didn't feel hesitant at pushing the multicultural framework forward. And in a way, you could say that the framework made us more authentic as a New Zealand library and less as a European library, if you know what I mean. So yeah, more authentically Kiwi, more authentically Whanganui or local Whanganui than we had been before. So that's been a great feeling to be, sincere and real in this space. Iwi engagement, so Iwi, they're crucial for authenticity. If they don't support you, then you can't really have a Māori framework unless your closest iwi collective agrees with and supports it. So we took it to our most knowledgeable iwi members, got them to look it over and to make sure that it would stand up as an acceptable interpretation of whanganui-tanga as it applies to libraries. The proposed framework went through several rounds of consultation, including local iwi groups, library management teams, staff, kaumatas, which is our elders, groups of elders, and other community groups. So it was quite a stringent round of consultation to get it over the line. But if everyone doesn't agree and buy into the theme, then it's very difficult to work it. When it was time to introduce changes under the framework, which was changes in space, changes in policy, changes in process, to the library service, we brought every new change to our colleagues and explained why we thought this was going to be a good idea, how it aligned with the framework, how it was beneficial to everyone, so that we were implementing something that everyone was on board with, and not so much these days, as library culture tends to be handed down to the next generation of staff. So as time goes on, the next generation of staff just accepts it as this is how you do things. Were there challenges? Yes, not everyone saw the benefits at first. So information management from a Māori perspective is much different. So it comes from a different place. And for many, especially your old school librarian, it's a bit out of the comfort zone. However, library staff, well, this is what I find anyway, library staff are generally very open-minded, and I believe, and still do believe in the capacity of people to accept other people's cultural perspectives and imperatives once they achieve a level of understanding. And it's the understanding that is the core. So as long as you explain it properly, they know and they understand, then, most people are fine. One of the ongoing challenges I find is keeping it at the forefront of people's minds. So we do need regular reminders regular visible reminders. Otherwise, before you know it, people have slotted back into their old box again. So, yep, you do have to keep on top of it. We work at it, have regular wānanga discussions, etc. One of the big challenges, and you brought this up too, Pippa, was the lack of Māori staff to carry the kaupapa. So you really do need that person that truly understands what is the meaning of Whanganui-tanga. No one can express it better than a Māori person. I know it seems a little bit on the racist side, but it's more about the cultural expression, and no one knows it better than a person who is either iwi and better local iwi. So yeah, I think that sometimes can be a barrier. Do we still encounter racism or unconscious bias? Oops, better hurry up. So yes, it's still out there for some. Unconscious bias more than, open racism. Most people would have passed that now, but it can be devastating, and particularly for our younger staff, very upsetting. So Sandy's given my mate who's timekeeping over here has given me a bit of a hurry up. So can we have the last slide, please? So what did we do with it? That's my mood board, so get in the mood. We've made lots of changes to the library service over time, including the introduction of a Māori stone, rearranged the space to give it a more of a living room feel, because that's what we like. And we're initially going to have separate spaces, like, where Māori people can be themselves sort of thing. But then we realised that was kind of contrary to our framework and what we were trying to achieve. So we're just like, oh no, that goes. So it's open, so everybody, is the same. So equity of access has to go both ways, eh? So we introduced Māori name for the library, Māori staff titles. One of the big things we had to get over the line was the food and drink policy, because to Māori people, talking about certain things when there was food and drink around is just a no-no. So we had to ban food and drink from the actual library space. So we had to sit down and wānanga that with the other staff so people would understand. But it was fine eventually. And we've introduced karakia, which is like prayers morning and night, which is also, part of Māori culture to do at the beginning, at the end. Many, many things. I mean, I could go on and on, but I know I'm running out of time. But so essentially, has it made a difference? Yes, of course. People aren't tiptoeing around anymore. I can hear voices instead of whispers. Sometimes you see the red band gumboots all lined up at the door because all the Māori people are in here wandering around. And very often there's more Māori people in here than there are others. So, yep, it's had a great change to do with just altering that feeling in the library. And my last comment, since I just, I'll skip to the end. So what's next? And the potential of libraries is limitless. So looking at it from the standpoint of an Indigenous person, once you understand that we're not confined by four walls and shelves or specific cultural norms, then the sky's the limit. Haere ake.
Hoia nei a kulo he, timata i tua, ruka te, te ao, te karamoe, e ngā paera, ki te matapi, Whanganui e, rua pehu te manga, Whanganui te Atiha te iwi, tihei mauri ora.
Kia ora, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jasmin. That was wonderful. And again, I'm going to guess it's going to be for all our speakers. I have lots of questions and things to ask you. But yeah, thank you so much, especially those insights around how the library is, it's the culture of the library is not just about the staff, it's the physical space as well. And I just, that's lots of things to consider there. In the interest of time, sorry, I will talk forever if you let me. I will introduce our next speaker, which is Paige Johnson, who will be presenting on co-designing with community, tea, yarns, and rule breaking.
Thanks, Lise. I'll wait for the slides before I...
There seems to be a little delay, but they should be up in a moment.
There we are.
Excellent. All right, take it away.
I have the same artwork that Pippa had on hers because it's our it's the artwork for the University of Sydney Library. So hi, I'm Paige. I'm a Gamilaroi woman born on Gadigal country, raised on Darug country, and I'm coming to you from Darug country on the banks of the Cooks River. And whenever I do an acknowledgement of country, I like to just take a moment to consider and affirm that I'm also acknowledging my responsibilities as a visitor to this land. This is not my ancestors' country where I'm coming from. So I am responsible as a guest on this country to be respectful to the land, respectful to the people. And thank you for having me here online today. So Indigenous engagement, that's what we're going to learn about. I might move on to the next slide because it's a little bit better structured for this. So I'm currently the Indigenous Engagement Officer for the University of Sydney. But a little bit about my background. So I started at the University of Sydney in 2019 as a shelver, as a full-time shelver, which was a lot of fun during COVID. And at the time, I was the only Indigenous identified staff person at the library. Now we've got, about 8 or 9 of us now. We've got so many, it just keeps expanding. But at the time, it was me in the only Indigenous identified role. There are other staff in the library that aren't in identified roles, but the role that I was in was identified. And then I moved into working with the library's peer support team who look after the library's tech spaces as well. And then when Pippa came on board, we started working together. I think the first project that we really worked on together was one of the ones I'll talk about a bit later, around creating 2 Indigenous bespoke spaces for Indigenous students. And then I started in Pippa's old role back in October last year, I think is when I started covering it. And then I officially started in it at the start of this year. So it's been a, as you can see from the timeline, very, very short turnaround in terms of how much the library has been trying to do. And it all kind of comes back to the development of the cultural protocols. So ask anyone here, they'll tell you that we were the first university library to develop Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural protocols. So this was a project worked on by the amazing Nathan Sentence. And they were first published in 2022, and the protocols they recommended the creation of an Indigenous engagement officer role, as well as the library making it a priority to look for more opportunities to employ Indigenous staff, which is how what started as a team of just one Indigenous engagement officer when Pippa started has expanded. So I now have 2 awesome people that I work with. We're a team of 3 at the moment, and we are currently in the process of hiring a 4th person to be on our team. So Indigenous engagement as a team actually is a team now. It's great. And all of that has happened essentially in the space of 6 years, but probably more realistically in the space of about 2.5 to 3 years. And Pippa was really, really core to a lot of that progress as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so co-designing with community is something that I think it's been paramount to just everything that we have done as Indigenous engagement. And the reason why it was kind of core is because inherently libraries are colonial systems and structures. And even the best libraries, following the best practices and best intentions, will still have systems or even just like little things in place that reflect this legacy. And all of the research that we have done with all of our projects, especially just anything that you find from NASLA, the State Library of New South Wales was a really big source for us. Universities Australia, everything that we've looked at has come from essentially, again, colonial sources trying to look at what they can do to improve engagement with Indigenous communities. And from an Indigenous community perspectives, libraries have the reputation that is informed by this colonial legacy. And that doesn't just translate as not going to the library. It can also translate as what we see from students here, which is they'll go to the library, but they'll feel really uncomfortable the whole time. So it's almost like a punishment for themselves to have to go to the library to study. Like they'll only do it when they really, really have to. And that means that they try to minimize their engagement with staff. They minimize like the amount of space that they take up, and they generally hold the expectation that their needs aren't going to be met by what the library has to offer. And when you're putting that also on top of the legacy of the oldest university in the country, the baggage is massive. And even after I think at least a decade of Indigenous strategies from a university level all the way down to like the library as its own Indigenous strategies, the progress has been great, but the legacy is still there and it still impacts things. So co-design became just like the key, because we were very aware that the institution was built and the library itself was built in a structure that doesn't accommodate for Indigenous students and Indigenous staff, Indigenous ideas, Indigenous knowledges. If anything, it was built against it. And the legacies that Pippa is now reckoning with as well in her work is very much like a key indicator of that. So we knew that as an institution, we couldn't just kind of go about these things in a business as usual way, especially with something like the space. It wasn't just a matter of put some furniture into this space and students will come and use it. we wanted to make sure that whatever we did, it came from a very genuine and meaningful place. And to do that, you need to go out and talk to the community, which is what we did. We also knew that there is a gap between what the library does and what the Indigenous community knows about what the library does. But we didn't know how big or varied that gap could be, because there's no one way of being an Indigenous person. There's no one lived experience of Indigenous community and Indigenous engagement in colonial spaces like libraries. So we wanted to go out and get a good understanding of what the students in particular thought of us, as well as what the staff think of us. And then from that, we wanted to understand the opportunities that we had to basically close those gaps, the work that we could do, rather than asking the community to do more work to understand us. And then also what it is that the community needs and how we can maybe start to build some bridges or fill in some needs gaps that the community has here at the university. So next slide, please. So our engagement, when we went about our engagement, we had to be really mindful of what it was we wanted to discuss with Indigenous staff and students, and how we could go about having those discussions as respectfully and candidly as possible. So respectful in terms of time, respectful in terms of not overburdening the people that we were talking to, because it's kind of one thing for us to have a work that involves talking to community and working on community centered projects, but it's another thing to kind of take the kind of cultural responsibilities that we have and force them onto other members of our community as well. So we wanted to try and minimize the I suppose disruption and potential of colonial load as much as possible, whilst also being able to have these conversations and get this work going. So the key things that we did were we organised engagement by groups as much as possible, and we sought out comfortable community spaces around campus for the hosting of these sessions. We held workshops where we asked for both individual written responses as well as discussions around different questions. We made sure to offer some form of reciprocity, whether it was catering cups of tea, morning tea. Everyone loves a fruit platter and everyone loves a scone. And everyone loves to just kind of have a chat over a cup of tea and a scone as well. And making sure that the food and everything as well was really key to also breaking down the just that kind of awkward people not really sure if they're allowed to say what they want to say or not. Because we wanted everyone to be as honest with us as they felt comfortable being, because if they're not honest with us, then we can't find out what the actual issues are. When it came to talking to students, we had some students who were student ambassadors for the university. So when we were engaging and asking them questions, we had that just be a shift for them. They were already staff at the university. We had some casuals who were working with us, Indigenous student casuals working with our team at the library for a couple of months, who, again, whenever we were doing sort of engagement, asking them questions, looking for feedback, that was all paid time. And then any students who volunteered to just kind of do a survey for us, we also made sure to give them a gift voucher of some sort. So there's always some sort of reciprocity on offer to acknowledge that we are taking time and asking for work from them. And then after all of the engagement that we did, we'd always make sure to confirm with attendees that their thoughts and ideas were recorded by us accurately and that they've been represented as intended in the notes that we had. So this was as simple as kind of writing up a document of our note taking and then sending that document off to all of the attendees to make sure that they were perfectly okay with everything that we said. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had some really interesting insights from the staff and students that we spoke to, and a lot of these have been taken on board and carried over into the new projects that we're doing as well. So when we were looking at developing the spaces, we learned that, well, from the perspective of the library, libraries consider themselves to be community spaces, but it wasn't as simple as that when it came to building a space for the Indigenous community on campus, because they already had one. We were in very, very strong competition with a embedded, trusted community space on campus, which is the Gadigal Centre, and the students really value the Gadigal Centre above pretty much every support at the university. So we knew that we couldn't just kind of go, oh, we've made a space for you, come and use it. We had to make it so that there was like a utility to it that was valuable, but also not trying to be in competition with the Gadigal Centre. We were working with the Gadigal Centre, not in competition with them. We know that staff and students weren't fully aware of all of the library support or services or how to access them. So we knew that that was something that we needed to overcome, and overcoming that is probably the hardest part of the role, because it doesn't matter how many times you send out an email or promote a service, it's not always going to be seen by everybody. It's not always going to be understood. And so all of these things tend to be backed up by going down, talking to people, having conversations, not necessarily meetings, just like casual, candid conversations, which is really different to, I think, what a lot of people consider to be library work. The relationships are the core of all of the support here. So staff want to know who they're sending their students to, so they need to know who we are. The students want to know who they're talking to when they come to talk to us. And the connection between support staff is essential, because from the staff's perspectives, they want students to be able to talk to anybody and then get linked in with other support staff. And it's this whole big network. So we knew that the staff at the Gadigal Centre, if they had a student who needed support, that would essentially be support that we offered from the library. We needed to make sure that the staff knew that that was something that we could offer, but also who they could talk to, who they could call, who they could email, because that is how they like to bring in all of their support networks to come and help a student. So yeah, it's a lot of telling people my email, giving people my phone number, and just ready to be on call at any time. And lastly, to deliver support to students the way that they need, staff feel compelled to bend or break the rules of their role or of their department to make things work, which again kind of comes back to this this colonial load that we've talked about already, like Pippa and Jasmin both mentioned it, but it's very much that a lot of the Indigenous support staff around here and a lot of the Indigenous staff at libraries are very aware that they of their responsibilities, of the connection within the community and network that they are working within, and that might not always work with like what the existing structures or policies or protocols are, but sometimes those things just need to be bent in order to be whether more culturally safe or to build that relationship rapport. It's a lot less transactional when it comes to providing support or delivering service to Indigenous students. So that was something that is very different to how the library operates. And we needed to figure out a way to build a service model that also incorporated this. So on the last slide, there is some of the actions that we've taken. So we've set up 2 spaces, one in the main library on campus, which is Fisher Library. It's in a really highly trafficked space. It's full of artwork. It's a space that we host cultural workshops. It's a space that we host embedded like library teaching for different Indigenous programs across the university. We are doing our best to kind of build relationships with academics who are running Indigenous only programs so that they bring their students into our spaces and we accommodate them for the teaching that they need to do, as well as the library support that they need. Our second space is in a smaller library. It's our SciTech library. It's on the other side of campus. It's a private study room. It's bookable. It's swipe access only by Indigenous students. And we only had the swipe access put on at the start of the year. So that space has been up for over a year now, but it's only been swipe accessible exclusive for 6 months. And the bookings have increased, I think, about triple what they were in the last 6 months of last year versus the first 6 months of this year. So we know that that exclusivity has been really important for the students to feel safe using that space as well. And because it's swipe accessible to Indigenous students only, we've been able to partner with the student union to have food available in the cupboards, and we don't have to worry about that being an issue or something that we can't sustain, because if it's open to all students, the food disappears. And then when we were building our service model for these spaces, we've come up with a bespoke shirt design. So this shirt is only available to Indigenous staff at the library to wear, which is that beautiful blue shirt up on the top corner there. We are hosting weekly drop-in sessions at the Gadigal Centre. So the bigger photo there is of me at one of the drop-ins. We're piloting an Indigenous cultural competency training for the direct line managers of Indigenous staff. So this is an additional training. There is one that is done by all university staff, but we decided that if we're increasing the number of Indigenous staff at the library, that the direct line managers of those staff should have a bit more, I suppose, training and support, and building a sort of community of knowledges around cultural competency. We've increased just the variety of displays. We currently have a beautiful display of like documents from the Whanganui collection, which is one of the most, I suppose, extensive collections of Indigenous materials on campus, which is housed at the Gadigal Centre, all the way through to different comics that we've had come into the collection as part of our NAIDOC Week display. We've had displays of the works of different Indigenous academics from across the university. We're doing a lot more to platform Indigenous voices and Indigenous perspectives, and very specifically ones from within the university, especially to just kind of be showing all of the amazing work that's being done with Indigenous knowledges and the application of Indigenous knowledges within academia. And we've increased our cultural programming. So for Welcome Week period and for the exam preparation period, we are hosting more events, especially within our Fisher space, events around like more kind of craft things that also then we have facilitators come in to help lead discussions that involve truth telling and cultural knowledges sharing. And these are open to all students, just Indigenous students, because the library is also seen as a space where that sort of education and knowledge sharing can happen. And then just down to my last slide. Okay, so this is kind of my summary for the things that we needed to be able to engage really well with our co-design with community. So being aware of yourself, your organization and its history, having respect for the community's time and their resources, and not expecting to get everything that you want in the one session or from the one person, making sure that you're being very clear and transparent about what it is that you're asking for from the community when you're doing this sort of engagement, and doing everything that you can to help people feel comfortable expressing themselves, because you want them to express themselves accurately and like truthfully, and that might involve you maybe hearing something that you weren't expecting, or it might make you feel a bit uncomfortable. But if you go into it expecting that you might hear things that make you uncomfortable, it can help you to respond to that in a way that makes better and good things happen. I think that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was wonderful. And especially with those ideas of, like engagement and what does engagement actually look like? And I think it was really well articulated, especially the ways that, I think you articulated how those colonial education structures really, have barriers and are limiting for so many Indigenous students. But just how quickly and how much like change you see once you address that. I think it's really fascinating evidence there too for the validity of those approaches. Okay, so we have heard from all our speakers, and I think we have about 15 minutes now for any questions or discussion.
So Elise, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I didn't collate them because you only need to scroll up a couple of bits to see that.
Excellent.
And one from Cynthia. Just a few clicks, 2 scrolls up the chat.
Thank you very much. Okay, so first, I think we have a question from Ellen, addressed towards Pippa. Very interested in the books, comics, etc. you've acquired, and that these titles can be very interesting for public library collections. Did you just want to elaborate a little on those, like books, comic books, Indigenous sci-fi, I think I remember you talking about, that you've acquired and sort of representing the, I guess, diversity of Indigenous writing, Indigenous storytelling in that space?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose this is something I've probably taken from public libraries, inspired by in terms of collecting more contemporary books, which I don't think people realize that in rare books, we've got things that are published as soon as last year sort of thing. But the highlight ones we've gotten in, one's called the Indigiverse. So definitely add it to your collections. There's another one called Dreamwalker. But yeah, jump on. I think you can we got these ones through James Bennett, so they should be accessible. If not, I am trying to also, because I know that process takes a lot of time, I am trying to see if we can source them straight from the community and from the artists themselves, so make sure that they get that money and get that funding straight to them. Another really great artist is a person by the name of Coffin Birth Charlotte Allingham. So their work's gorgeous. But yeah, I think we're really trying to build up our sci-fi and comic book collection here to be able to create cool displays that aren't just a lot more of like the colonial sort of earlier stuff. But yeah, definitely recommend.
Thank you. And Pippa is actually, Paige is putting some links in the chat as well for anyone interested in exploring those further. And I say I can definitely second the recommendation around Indigiverse. It's some great stuff. Next up, we have a question from Nilu for Jasmin. It was very interesting when you mentioned you changed the feeling of the library, not the physical, the visual layout. I'm curious about how it feels different when a space is transformed to reflect different worldviews. Could you share more examples of what that transformation feels like?
I guess you could say it just like you can tell because it feels comfortable. You know how I originally said I had that uncomfortable feeling, like I felt alien in the space. So that feeling's gone now. I mean, I feel comfortable, and you can see it on people's faces when they come in. They also feel comfortable. And one of the really interesting and quite immediate outcomes of instituting the framework was that Ngārori Iwi, which is one of our local tribes, asked us to take their archives, which, is a pretty high level of trust for an iwi to allow a public institution to take their tribal archives. So that was pretty amazing. But it just goes to show that once you have those things in place that make people feel comfortable, then it makes a difference.
Can I just pop in there? The difference with this archives, the iwi archives, is facilitated by the iwi. People have to inquire with them. We, as the library, do not tamper with their stuff. So they are the kaitiaki and guiders for it. We look after it with them, for them.
So that's just my boss popping in there. So yeah, she's just expressing that that was the agreement we had with them, or that we made with them, that they still have control over the archives. So we haven't absorbed it into the collection. It's separate. They have control, they have the key. When anybody wants to get into the archive, we redirect them to the iwi office and they will send someone out to open it to allow people to look. So yeah, it's just
That's excellent elaboration, actually. I think it also speaks a lot to that embedding data sovereignty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have a question from Cynthia for Jasmin as well. What percentage of your population is Indigenous?
In Whanganui, probably about 15, 20, 15, I think. Between 15 and 20, off the top of my head. Yep. But it's growing, of course. It's all growing.
To say that this represents a significant amount of people who use the library now, from the sounds of it.
Yep. And if you look at our library, membership overall, it's more than 2/3 of our population. So we're a big library user as a region. Anyway, so yeah, it's huge.
I actually would, just while I've got you here, just like to if you don't mind elaborating a little more. When you was talking about how you can feel the difference, and what you noticed was that people used to walk in and they'd be sort of, don't want to make noise, and I think we all probably know that traditional thing of libraries and people going shh shh shh, and then leaving really quickly, and that you've seen such a massive change in that doesn't happen anymore. Would you just to clarify, is that just for First Nations people, or is that change across culture as well?
It's changed across culture as well. That's
fascinating.
Yeah, that's everyone. And I think when you think about it, those values that Māori people have, they're not exclusively Māori people's values. I mean, people all over the world have those values. It's just that, we just have a genius for packaging it, I think.
So can I just pop in again and just say, when you're talking about the change in the feel comes from the discussions with customers. They're who say this feels different. The other part is when we work, like librarians, a customer comes in, they go up in their face, blah, 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 and then run away and forget to respect them, allow them to sit down and stuff. We're about allowing you to welcome you in, to take a seat, and we sit down at the even level. Even those kind of things are so important to join each other at the table rather than be at people. So those are big things that I want to change.
Sort of that's really speaking to as well, addressing those colonial hierarchies and sort of power differences there. Yeah. I just noticed we've got another question, a general question, so one for everybody and perhaps a bit more foundational for all presenters. You've provided exceptional examples and projects, but I would like to ask, and this is from Nilu, do information institutions have the ability to collect and provide access to Indigenous knowledge in a way that meaningfully connects individuals and communities who need it?
Who wants to go first? Shall I go first?
To say it's a good question.
It's an excellent
It is
question.
a good question. It is a good question.
I think you can go first, Jasmin.
Now you go first.
I mean, it's I suppose a lot of what we do at USyd, and I think people would probably have a better gauge of it in the work that she's doing, is a lot of the work that we are doing at the moment is around making that process easier. So we are, at first we just kind of need to be aware as much as possible of the communities whose knowledges are within our collections, especially within the rare books and special collections, and the histories of all the different anthropologists that have come through the university as well. We know that we've got information about communities that the communities themselves might not even know that we have. And a lot of it isn't currently discoverable. So getting things into the catalogue has been a massive project for especially our cultural collections department. And then I suppose the ability to connect with communities is something that it still kind of takes a lot of time and is a real kind of specialist sort of practice. That being said, we do have materials within our collections that require community permissions before anyone can access it, just because of the content within those collections. And so when it comes to the communities where that information is something that they're aware that we have, and we have that process in place, I think that's where there are channels that have been built a bit better. But it's still such an expansive and I suppose time intensive process, because if you're contacting communities, then you need to make sure that the people who are giving permission are the people who have the authority to as well. And yeah, and it's Pippa's wheelhouse, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I just might jump in there. Thanks, Paige. I think a big thing, particularly because we're very much at the start of this, in terms of, as Paige said, understanding what we've got, understanding who the communities are, and really understanding how to make that searchable, or what the metadata is going to look like. And as I was talking about, the next step from that will be reaching out and building those relationships with communities. Places like the State Library, IATSIS and NLA are a lot more far ahead than what we are. And their approach, the trickiness we have as well is a lot of our materials are published. And so that means that there could be hundreds of copies of one title across the country, and we can only do what's really do what's in our collection. So we might follow cultural protocol, but then people can go out. We might say, look, there's cultural sensitivity ceremony in this book. You need to go seek community approval. But they could go get that copy digitized from Project Gutenberg online or something. So it's a trickiness, and there's a lot of layers to it. So yeah, we're not quite functioning like an archive. We're sort of in that middle space. But I think a lot of communities, the hope, I guess, is that they'll be open to having these conversations, and for them to make that decision on about access for them, but then also for researchers, students, and everyone else. But yeah, anyway, Jasmin, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool question. So, yes, in a traditional library space, we do and we can do that kind of thing, and they will normally ask us if we'll take this, this archive or that archive. But what I was trying to say at the end of my talk about, from here to infinity, is that we really don't need to be forced into the library box. And one of the things that we try to get our communities and our iwi to do is to take responsibility for their own information. And so that rather than bringing it all into the library and being the gatekeeper and lording over it, rather we extend the library out so that, the library connects with the individual libraries out there. So even now we know where the stuff is, we know who's got what under their bed. But, rather than taking that from people, and they lose control and they just can't stand that and they lose control over their own information, rather we need to make a connection with them. And those are the kind of things that we're working on now, as to how we can make that beneficial to our iwi without taking it from them. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I don't know if that really answers what you mean, but it's making that connection out there rather than, taking it all and keeping it away from everybody.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of reframing the question in a sense of, it's less about what a traditional library will do, and more about, like you said, a brilliant point of extending the library out instead of bringing people in. I think that's really interesting.
Digital capability these days, just it's endless. It really is endless.
So we have one last question and exactly 2 minutes left. So we have time for a very quick answer to Paige specifically. This is from M. Botham. Have any non-Indigenous, non-European cultural groups requested exclusive use safe spaces in the library? And how would such requests be considered and fulfilled?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, no, there hasn't been any sort of exclusive access request. Even with our Indigenous space in the SciTech library, which is exclusive, that one we made it exclusive, not necessarily because we were asked to, but mostly because we identified an issue with I suppose just overcrowding in the rest of the general library, and we had heard from students that they weren't really using the space because whenever they went to go in there, even if they booked the space, there would usually be a bunch of other students in there, and they didn't really understand why they were being asked to leave. And so our students, the Indigenous students, weren't actually utilizing it.
And does that, just
yeah.
if I may interrupt quickly, does that speak to perhaps the Indigenous students' experience that they didn't all feel comfortable, for example, walking up and saying, "Get out of my space, I booked this"?
Yeah, and it was also, I suppose, like from our perspectives in Indigenous students, I mean, Indigenous students at USyd, they make up, I think, roughly under 2% of the domestic student intake. And once you put that in with all students, they make up 0.7% of the community here. And yeah, and our goal was to just kind of make a space that they wanted to access and that they'd be able to access and that they'd be able to access comfortably. And so it wasn't so much that they'd asked to have this exclusive space. It was just that we'd identified that there was a block, and that block was again, we're in competition. We're not in competition, but we're very aware of, you know, if a student doesn't want to use this, if an Indigenous student doesn't want to use a library space, they'll just go to the Gadigal Centre and find a space there. And we didn't want to be, I suppose, constantly losing the potential for students to come in and engage if they already kind of wrote us off from the start. So the exclusive access was that, yeah.
I was just going to say, sorry, thank you so much for that. And I think that's a good point and really interesting to consider with that it wasn't a space that was requested exclusivity. It was an identified need. And I think that goes back to what you were saying in your talk about engagement. What does engagement mean? And, you know, nothing for community without community. It's also being about to be responsive to people's needs in that sense. And to, you know, do that work, I guess, carry that load of identifying things that will help without making everybody sort of have to dwell on and think of all those barriers and everything. That is all we have time for. But I want to say thank you so much, you know, Pippa, Jasmin and Paige. Those were like genuinely wonderful talks, and I have so many things to think about, and I very much think our audience does as well. And thank you everyone for those amazing questions. I think it added a lot of depth and just interesting things to continue to reflect on. I'm going to end the recording now to set us out. If the technology will cooperate.